Welcome to part 2, and this is Mysql working area. So these are called instances. You can create as many as you can. Every instance you create will be given a different IP address, but they will all run onto the same port 3306. So if you have XAMPP installed and you try to run XAMPP on the same machine which you have installed the Mysql workbench, you have a confliction because of the same port. Example, we want to use 3306 and yet also SQL Workbench uses the same port. So you have to go into the config file for example and try to change the port number. So when you click on local instances, you'll be prompted to enter the password you used when you were installing this workbench. Um, at install at your first time, you'll be given some sample schemes like world, timeline, system, and circuit. You can go through them, check them out, see what you can use. So we have three buttons here. The first one controls the navigator section, as you see. The middle one controls output section, and the last one controls my SQL additions. So what we call a scheme in Workbench, it is what we call a database name in XAMPP or SQL. This is a sample uh, sorry, this is a sample PHP file code, sorry. Yeah, so what we call a scheme here, like I have login systems. Yeah, I have login systems. This is a scheme in Workbench, but when you're writing code in PHP, you call it name, like database name, whatever, or DB name. Okay, so we're gonna create a scheme called test schemes. Let me first drop this one because it's gonna be the same scheme. Okay, we create when creating a new scheme, click this button. Let's name it test scheme. Click apply. Leave the rest as default. Still leave the rest as default. Click apply. Then finish. And here's our scheme. As you can see, our scheme is pretty empty. We have no tables. Remove this. Let's create a new tab. I already have the data. So let's populate it with a table called employee with an employee ID as the primary, first name as a varchar, and salary as an integer. So if you want to populate a certain scheme, you have to double click on the name and the name will be bolded. Any scheme that has a bolded name, that means that's the scheme that's selected. Any data you try to put into that scheme will go into the scheme that has that's selected. And to know that the scheme is selected, it will be bolded. As you saw, I had really forgot that. So I select my data, I fire it up, I execute the code, and it's all a success. So you have to refresh every time. The scheme does not refresh itself automatically. So we have a table here called employee. As you can see, our data is in there. So we try to insert data into the table. It's a success. Okay. So another thing, there is no way you will see the real data you have inserted into the table. You can't see it here or anywhere here. So you have to use the usual MySQL code to see your data. This is our data that we have entered. So how do we connect to our database? That was intentional, don't worry. How do we connect to our database in PHP? So this is a sample PHP code, the usual, you see. So what we call a database name, username here, the root name, that will be our username in usual PHP config files. Then the password you have to insert into the password that you used when you are installing the SQL Workbench, and database name, as I've told you, that's what we call scheme names. So if you want to connect to our database, that's called test schemes. Let me just remove this. We'll just say test test scheme. Okay, so db host, this is the URL that will be provided, and it's down here, localhost 33.0. You can exclude this port, this section, because it automatically will be listening to 33.0 if you want to, but I feel safe leaving it there. So okay, that is it, and thank you guys.